What should we expect from second-year wide receivers Charlie Jones and Andrei Iosivas? What about first-round pick Myles Murphy? Let's break it down.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Lisco. He's your host, James Rapine. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network here on Locked On Bengals, covering your team every day, available on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcasts, available in your car, on your ride to work, or on your TV while you're making breakfast or sitting down for a little break in the day. Whatever it is, we appreciate you for watching the Locked On Bengals or listening to the Locked On Bengals podcast. And all you people out there who make us a part of your everyday routine and make us your first listen, we appreciate all of you as well. Today, James, we dive into a mailbag episode, and the questions are interestingly starting with wide receivers, your favorite topic, and second-year wide receivers. Last year's rookies Charlie Jones and Andrei Iosivas on the minds of a couple of our listeners, Robbie Sherrill and Sean Rickman, asking questions that relate to each other on Twitter. Robbie says, do you think people are sleeping on Andrei Iosivas? He was a trusted target last season, and I have to imagine his athleticism allows him to play a bigger role this season. But Robbie thinks most of the attention is on Jermaine Burton and Charlie Jones. Meanwhile, Sean asks what the outlook is on Charlie Jones. Did he just not show well in practice last year? It sounds like two different angles to a similar question from Sean and Robbie.
Yeah, it's a stock watch for both of these second-year receivers. And look, going into the draft, we tried to say, hey, the Bengals want to address wide receiver. And the common response was, well, what about Charlie Jones and Andrei Iosivas? And the answer for both guys, and I like both guys, is we just don't know. The Bengals don't know. We don't know. The Bengals hope they know, hope they got it right, hope Charlie Jones can be the slot receiver that's a pristine route runner that gives them some downfield speed when needed and can be a primary punt returner week in and week out and stay healthy. And who knows, maybe help on kickoffs as well. They hope that. They hope Andrei Iosivas gives them this, certainly an outside downfield threat, but this athletic, bigger bodied guy that is just really athletic, that was ahead. And I will say this, he was ahead of where they thought he would be last year. And we saw that. We saw some of those flashes, some of that trust in the red zone that Joe Burrow had in him. But we need to see more of it from both guys. And for Charlie, I think there was an adjustment learning the slot. He didn't really play slot at Purdue. And just because he's a 5'11" white dude doesn't mean he just plugs into the slot and he's going to be Wes Welker. And I'm obviously joking there to a degree, but there was an adjustment period for him. And part of it is switching to the slot. The other part is just overall strength. He needs to get stronger. Something you were on his punt returns early last year. I mean, preseason, you were talking about it. Him not breaking many tackles. And you want to see that. You want to see a little more strength, play strength specifically from him. I think he'll pick up the slot. I think that part will be fine. But we just haven't seen a lot of him. And we haven't seen a ton of Andrei Iosivas. Both guys are going to get their chance. It's a big offseason for them. It'll be a big training camp for them in a few months. And I think both guys could be contributors this year, significant contributors to a degree, with whatever significant means behind Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. But we'll see if they get there.
Yeah, I sometimes make jokes. You're referring to the Charlie Jones strength stuff that don't always make it to the public podcasts. And the Charlie Jones break a single tackle challenge was one of those jokes on the punters. He eventually did, to his credit, and he had a touchdown, or was it just a really long punt return?
Touchdown against the Ravens early in the season. Game 2.
That's right. And then it was like, okay, Charlie has some juice in the punt return game. That's all you need to see. As soon as he does it once, the jokes kind of died down. And it was mostly a joke, to be fair. But at his size, the way he played, it was always a question of how would he deal with NFL level strength and the physicality that comes with playing the wide receiver position in the NFL, where players are stronger, more athletic, and you're going to have to deal with more of that than you always had to deal with in college. And we're talking about two guys here that had a combined 34 targets last year. Andrei Iosivas ranked 9th on the Bengals in targets with 25. He had fewer targets than Irv Smith, than Drew Sample, than Trent Irwin, than Tanner Hudson last year. Charlie Jones had less targets than Mitchell Wilcox last year, and I've talked about Mitchell Wilcox's uh,
Oh,
invisibility issues on the field at times, depending on who's playing quarterback for the Bengals. And Wilcox, well, most of these guys have departed, right? Well, not most. Wilcox and Irv Smith have departed. Tanner Hudson's going to be fighting for a roster spot. Drew Sample is not going to be the primary receiving tight end by any means. So you're talking about two receivers that were late round picks who did not have a ton of volume in their rookie seasons. Charlie Jones, the case for Charlie Jones is actually a very narrow path. There are very few receivers that are as unproductive as Charlie Jones historically that figure it out and become a productive receiver in the NFL. Obviously, in Cincinnati, there are reasons that Charlie Jones wasn't productive his rookie year. You talked about some of them in the position transition and just adjusting to NFL life, but these guys just couldn't get on the field last year very often behind the big three, the triumvirate of starting receivers in Cincinnati. But there were injury opportunities last year for these guys to step up as well. And while Iosivas did have the 4 touchdowns, he had 4 touchdowns on 25 targets, which is insane. Like, great red zone production, great end zone production, but only 116 yards. He actually had fewer yards receiving than Chase Brown, who got most of them on that big screen pass on 10 more and 1 more catch. So a long way to go for these guys. I think that they were both seen as some players who would need some development, and Charlie Jones took a little bit more time perhaps than anticipated when they were drafted. Iosivas ahead of where we thought he might be when he was drafted. But this is a big year for them. They have a huge opportunity in the offseason program right now with T. Higgins and Jamar Chase not in attendance to get those extra reps in with Joe Burrow, with the starting part of this offense. They have a huge opportunity because Tyler Boyd has departed to get an opportunity to just get on the field more. But it's a big year for them because if you don't make a huge impact for 2 years, it's really hard to imagine that that impact is coming later, and will be very rare in the course of NFL history to be really quiet for 2 years and then eventually break out. But Iosivas, just from a year one productivity perspective, those 4 touchdowns make him less of a statistical anomaly if he were to have a bigger contribution later in his career than Jones, just because of the way their careers have started. But either way, big year for either player to make their mark this season.
yeah. So real quick, while you were talking about history, I'm just like, all right, well, let me just pull up the stereotype. Let me pull up Wes Welker. Guess how many catches Wes Welker had as a rookie?
3.
He appeared in 15 games.
7.
0.
I was closer the first time.
Guess how
Talked me
many
into going up.
Guess how many yards he averaged per punt return?
Well, it sounds like he was pretty bad his first year.
I wouldn't say that. 10.8.
Well, 0
Guess how
catches
many
is pretty bad.
They probably didn't use him on offense at all. He had 43 his second year. Or no, wait, he had 29 his second year. Sorry, 434 yards. But he averaged 10.8 yards per return. Both guys did. So would it be crazy to see Chuck Sizzle finish with 34 catches? I wonder. I think that's where I'm at. Is it's like, all right, well, where would you put that? Obviously, that would be well over the over under.
Yeah.
But real quick, if you had to pick one, Andrei Iosivas or Charlie Jones, more receptions for 2024, who would you go with?
I think, despite what I just talked about with all the history stuff, I would lean Charlie Jones because I think he's going to have more of an opportunity in the slot than Iosivas was. And I think that's where there are more snaps available and more targets available. And he's going to be competing with fewer players for that role. So that's where I would lean. But obviously injuries would play a huge factor in determining that answer.
Yeah, it's such a 50-50 call because if T misses time or if Andrei Iosivas beats out Trenton for that, like there's just so many different things. If Burton's a little behind schedule, I do think that the natural progression is Charlie Jones takes a step, walks into 20 catches, even if they're 8 yards per catch, and boom, he wins that battle. We will see we have to get to more on the offense. We also have a Myles Murphy question coming up as well. We will do that coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the place you need to go right now so you can get and secure your tickets. The 2024 schedule is out. You know that the Bengals open up with the Patriots. Maybe you are all in on week 1, or maybe you're thinking about week 2 or week 3 under the Monday Night Lights. Yeah, it's Monday Night Lights, I believe, week 3. I know it's primetime lights either way. The point is whether it's primetime, 1 o'clock, anytime, it's Game Time. And that's why you got to download the Game Time app, because you're going to get the lowest prices on tickets. And whether it's the Bengals, whether it's the Reds, who are about to begin a 9-game homestand on Tuesday, or maybe it's your favorite musical artist, regardless, if you're looking for tickets for a live event, go to Game Time, download the Game Time app, and take the guesswork out of buying tickets by downloading the app, creating an account, and using code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download the Game Time app, create an account, and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDONNFL. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
Wes Welker, the Charlie Jones comp. You heard it here first from James Rapine. Never heard similarly built white guys that are going to play in the slot compared ever before in my life. This is a novelty. Well done, James.
It's funny because Charlie's actually taller.
Yeah.
Taller. I wouldn't say bigger, but he's taller than Wes by probably 2 inches. I don't think Charlie, he's listed at 6 foot. I think he's 5'11", but Wes Welker's 5'9", maybe in cleats.
Welker was also undrafted and didn't he obviously started producing before he went to the Patriots, but it took the move to the Patriots before his breakout really took off.
Yeah, but he's on the Patriots now. Joe Burrow is today's Tom Brady. Go ahead. How about that for a take? You thought the Welker Charlie Jones was crazy. He is the modern. I actually don't think that's crazy. Who else compares?
I don't think we're gonna. I wasn't ready for this topic today. We're going to talk about a Joe Burrow adjacent question. However, Bengals and Reds fan William on Twitter. Will we actually see more of an effort from the Bengals to run play action? Asks William. I know Joe Burrow loves the shotgun, but William feels the Bengals are missing an opportunity to get under center and run play action.
Yeah, I think that we will see more of it. And part of it is the explosives that can come off of play action. That's something they were working on in practice last week. We'll see if they are working on it again. But a lot of those deep balls, the one to Jermaine Burton that I think Mike Petraglia had, Joe Danneman of Fox 19 had, that went viral on social media. Play action. I posted one of him throwing to Shedrick Jackson. Play action. And it was kind of like this bootleg rollout. They're working on some nakeds, working on some things. I could totally see that being the case where they use it just enough to add another wrinkle or two that they just haven't had in past years. So yeah, I do. I think they're going to lean on play action a bit more. Part of that has to do with the evolution of this offense. Part of it has to do with knowing that they have to switch it up a bit and generating more explosive plays. This offense has to be more explosive. They just do. And adding Burton helps. Adding Gesicki helps, no doubt. But adding a few wrinkles as well that make the defense prepare, and having running backs that can be explosive, tie that all together. And I think it does mean more play action passes and hopefully more explosive plays downfield.
This is going to be the second straight offseason that we're watching the offseason program, and we're talking about this apparent emphasis on play action passing and getting under center and rolling out. And last year, we thought this was a plan. And then Joe Burrow's calf seized up on him one day and ripped a little bit, and he couldn't really move very well for a couple months. And that plan kind of went out the window, and the play action game for Joe Burrow remained mostly a shotgun play action game. They got under center a little bit with Burrow, and to a much greater degree with Jake Browning, we saw a different kind of play action game. And I think that was not something that they just invented and conjured out of thin air and installed the first time when Jake Browning took over. This is stuff that they worked on in camp and dusted off to a greater degree when Browning was a quarterback. But last year, there was this emphasis and expectation that we had going into the season that there was going to be more under center play action as part of the offense. And it didn't really materialize quite to the degree that we thought it would. When you look statistically, Jake Browning and Joe Burrow actually had the same percentage of play action passes. And that includes shotgun and under center. That doesn't have that split. But according to Pro Football Focus, Jake Browning had 20.4 of his dropbacks accounted for as play action passes, and Joe Burrow had 20.6. And Burrow graded better. He's going to grade better than Jake Browning in most categories at all times. But the big difference is that Jake Browning's yards per attempt went way up on play action plays. And Joe Burrow's didn't. Joe Burrow didn't see the big statistical boost from play action that you see from a lot of quarterbacks. And I assume that's largely because a lot of that was coming from shotgun play action. A lot of RPOs might be included here. I'm not sure how exactly Pro Football Focus categorizes play action passing, but if they can take some of that late season play action game and let Joe run more of it, no reason to think Joe Burrow can't run that better than Jake Browning. And there's a reason they're working on moving him off his spot so much right now. Part of that's his rehab. Part of it's just, this has been a point of emphasis in the offseason program for 2 straight years. And maybe this is something that Dan Pitcher is interested in doing. We'll maybe have a chance to talk to Dan Pitcher at some point in the future about his philosophy on getting under center, running play action versus more of what they've done in recent years, and whether he thinks there was a shift when Jake Browning took over at quarterback. But do expect there to be more of this, or at least a more visible emphasis in this area this year. But I always think about, people talk about Jake Browning's under center play action success. And then I remember when he yelled to the sideline, "No more effing nakeds." And that's play action too, right? And so at some point, Jake Browning was like, "No more of that. I'm taking too many hits." And that's something the Bengals had to figure out, because I remember we've talked about this before. A lot of the times they do these play action nakeds where the quarterback is rolling into an unprotected part of the field and the backside defensive end is just crashing on the quarterback. So they have to figure that out too. But that's a funny memory that I think about when people talk about the difference in offense with Browning and Burrow in play action.
I'm pretty sure they scored like right after that. I remember
Yeah.
Jake saying he was wrong. He ended up being wrong. Yeah.
But it's still funny.
It's hilarious. No, I agree. I think the other element here, Joe Burrow has self-awareness to know, all right, well, we need to evolve. It ties into his offseason training, his diet, all of those things. We talked about that after he spoke with the media. You don't think he can look around and be like, yeah, mixing in play action to add some explosive plays so I don't have to use my supercomputer brain to diagnose every second and put our offensive line in empty formations every play, that could be beneficial. Having a little more under center game, I think he will be, one, more than willing to, because that narrative, and it was like, of course, he wanted to do what he did in college and had so much success. But I think mixing that in more, he's certainly more than willing to, especially because I think he will trust this offensive line more so than any other offensive line he's had, from a pass protection standpoint, especially. And so when you mix that in, you throw that in, I think we will certainly see more under center, more play action, whether it's out of the gun or not. And Joe Burrow is going to thrive with it. I don't think it's going to be a struggle, to your point.
And play action does help the offensive line. Run game helps the offensive line. Play action can help the offensive line. Anything to delay the reads, delay teams crashing upfield. And it was an issue for the Bengals at times. Like I said, there are teams that just say ignore the play action and just chase down the quarterback. And that's what leads to some of the hits we saw on Jake Browning yelling, "No more effing nakeds" to the sideline, or Joe Burrow taking hits on some of those plays. But there is benefit to the offensive line as well when you run play action. Let's continue the mailbag episode with some thoughts on Myles Murphy's second season, the expectations there, and a few more questions we'll hit to wrap up the show coming up next.
Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs, well, they're down to the Final Four. It's Eastern and Western Conference final time. And the Boston Celtics, well, they're minus 160. They are the favorites to win the Larry O'Brien Trophy, to win the NBA Finals. And the Minnesota Timberwolves, oddly enough, second with plus 290. The Dallas Mavericks plus 500. The Indiana Pacers plus 2,300. So they are the dark horse. Well, right now you get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So maybe you want to throw $5 on the Mavericks game one, or you think that the Timberwolves are going to handle business in game one. Boom. Then once you're right, you get $150 in bonus bets to use. And maybe you want to use it on who you think is going to win the NBA championship. Right now, by the way, Boston Celtics versus the field. The field is plus 125. That's juicy because I do think the Mavericks and the Timberwolves could both take out the Celtics, the Pacers, and that's why the field is what it is. Well, it's an uphill battle for the Indiana Pacers. Whether it's NBA, whether it's Major League Baseball, NFL futures, FanDuel has you covered. And right now, you can get that $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. All you have to do is win that first $5 bet at FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
Let's talk Myles Murphy. Sophomore season expectations. Looks a little bit bigger in training camp or in the offseason program. Luxy Lucy at Benelux 141. What should we expect out of Myles Murphy's sophomore season?
I expect a lot. I do. I expect Myles Murphy to, by mid-year, we're like, man, the Bengals got one. That's what I expect. I hope to see it. And I think that the year one to year two jump really applies to him. He flashed at times last year. There's a lot to like about him as a player. And I think when you look at this Bengals defensive front, it's a big question. And who knows what ends up happening, but can you kick Sam Hubbard inside just a bit more? Does Murphy give you that freedom? Does he give you a legitimate edge pass rush presence opposite Trey Hendrickson? That's no knock on Sam Hubbard. Not saying that, but a legitimate, oh man, he's going to be a 12-sack guy one day. Maybe not this year, but one day. Maybe this year. I want to feel that. I want to have that discussion where it's like, yeah, he could be a double-digit sack guy in the near future. Maybe this year, but certainly next year. And I know double digits feels lofty, but he's a first rounder that had a high grade on him. He was young coming out. You mentioned it. He's bigger. We already knew he was athletic. He's working with Marion Hobby. He's one of these guys that you want to see develop and take a big step forward this year. So yeah, I expect to see him on the field. He's not going to start necessarily, but I expect to see him on the field a lot.
Well, and in this defense, Sam Hubbard, the way PFF does sacks, which doesn't use his half sacks, it pretty much says if you get a half sack, you would have had a full sack. So you just get a sack if you were involved in a sack. Sam Hubbard's had 2 double-digit sack seasons and a third season at 9 sacks. And it's not like anyone, well, I shouldn't say that. Some people do think Sam Hubbard's a really good pass rusher. Sam Hubbard's calling card is not in the pass rush part of the game as an edge defender. He's a stalwart run defender. He's a great hustle player in pass rushing. Occasionally he'll have some very clean pass rush wins, but for the most part, his sacks come from effort, from front side pressure that pushes a quarterback toward Hubbard doing his job. He's playing a lot of contain, and Hendrickson is the guy that they're asking to get upfield and just get to the quarterback more often. So
you pencil Hubbard in for 7 sacks. You take 6 to 7. Real sacks, not the PFF.
And like only some of them are like high quality. You beat your man. You disrupted the play. You created that for yourself. When it's Sam Hubbard, it's just the kind of player he is. This isn't a knock on Sam Hubbard. I don't want this to sound like a knock on Sam Hubbard. I think that you'll see him improve this year compared to last year when he was playing on a leg and a half at best. Maybe one leg, more than a leg and a half. But Murphy, I like a couple of things about his trajectory last year. One, you started to see that development in the second half of the season. You started to see those flashes with more frequency in the second half of the season. He just turned 22 in January, so still a young player, still younger than a lot of this year's draft class at 22 years old. I like that they played him all over the place. He played on the left side and the right side last year. They got him exposure on both sides so he can spell either Trey Hendrickson or Sam Hubbard. He also probably, if he has put on weight, he's listed 275. If he's up to 285, maybe he can kick inside a little bit as well. If Joseph Osai is back in the good graces of head coach Lou Anarumo, who went out of his way to praise Osai earlier in the offseason, back at the combine, I think, when he said, he's excited to see Osai go through an offseason not having to deal with an injury this year. But the game against Pittsburgh last year, where he racks up 3 pressures, he had a sack. Game against Minnesota a couple weeks later, he had a sack. There are moments down the stretch last year where you saw him starting to show off a little bit more as a pass rusher, starting to put things together a little bit as a pass rusher. And if he's putting those things together from a technique perspective, from a consistency perspective, from a pass rush plan perspective, he's always had the size and athletic traits to be a monster defensive end pass rusher in the NFL. And if the more he builds on those skills in that aspect of his game, the more you can expect him to make an impact. But if he's going to take that Rashawn Gary path, you would expect him to start to break out in a more consistent and very noticeable way this year. Rashawn Gary was always like the best case, I would say, for Myles Murphy, the Green Bay Packer edge rusher who had a bit of a slow start to his career and really picked it up at the second half of his rookie season. Murphy didn't quite do that, but if he can do that this year, then the sky's the limit for the Bengals 2023 first-round pick.
All right, so Charlie Jones is Wes Welker. Joe Burrow is Tom Brady. Myles Murphy is Rashawn Gary. Andrei Iosivas is who? Who are we going with?
I don't know. I thought I didn't know we were going to revisit that. I don't know.
No, it's just funny how this episode's gone. That's all.
Marvin Jones.
I think of Marvin Jones. There you go. That's actually a really good one. See, I knew there was a good one there. Ultimately, Darnay Scott would be another fun one. I think.
Yeah, sure.
I think of all those, as I joke, Myles Murphy is obviously the most likely. Like, there's a real scenario where this happens, and you want to talk about the path to the Bengals defensive line being a strength this year. It is Myles Murphy taking that leap, with Trey Hendrickson still being dominant and Sam Hubbard being 2022 Sam Hubbard, where he had 22 quarterback hits and was doing everything that he was doing because he was a force. He was disruptive, but in his way, where he's disrupting in a bunch of different ways, whether it's against the run and setting the edge, whether it's making Patrick Mahomes stay in the pocket and then running up on him. He's really good at those situations and dealing with these quarterbacks that like to move. So, yeah, there is a path to the Bengals defensive line being good and really good.
You ready for this? Sorry.
A big factor is Myles Murphy developing and taking a step forward.
You ready for this Rashawn Gary, Myles Murphy year 1 PFF stat comparison?
Ooh, let's go.
Rashawn Gary, 152 pass rushes his rookie year for the Green Bay Packers, had 16 pressures, had 3 sacks. Myles Murphy, 165. So he had 13 more pass rushing snaps. 165 pass rushing snaps, had 15 pressures, had 3 sacks. 1 fewer pressure, same amount of sacks on roughly the same number of pass rushes, 152 versus 165. Rashawn Gary's sophomore season had 349 pass rushes, had 9 sacks, had 46 pressures. And since then, when he's been healthy, he's been one of the best pass rushers in the NFL, in particular before his injury in 2021, when he played his best full healthy season, had 12 sacks, 87 pressures on 481 pass rushes. That is a very high win rate for Rashawn Gary. So, if Myles Murphy follows that path and a similar enough pass rushing profile in year 1, that would be a big shot in the arm for this Bengals defense.
Yeah, it would. He would be. Shot in the arms, the way to put it. So, yeah, Myles Gary, welcome to the Bengals. Myles Gary, we have Chuck Welker, and we have Mr. Joe Brady. Oh, can't do that.
Nope.
We have Mr. Tom Burrow. I don't know. Neither one works.
Don't like that. Neither.
Manning. Joe Burrow sounds good.
Burrow's just Joe Burrow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's wrap up the mailbag there then, before we go too far off the rails and misnaming the Bengals quarterback, Joe Burrow.
Misnaming. Right.
Well, none of those really worked. That's all. That's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. We'll be back with some coverage of the Bengals offseason program for you tomorrow as they resume practice open to the media. Until then, thanks for listening to this episode. Hoo day, and have a good one.